Hi, we're back in session. It's 1:05. I am going to be cracking the whip on this to keep us in at the timing that we've said. I apologize that you're probably going to have to watch some of us eating lunch on camera. I'm gonna go to some council questions just in the event that lunch and some time to ponder has created any questions for anyone. Mike, go ahead.
Right as I took a bite of my soup. Sorry, I'm not finished eating lunch. Apologize. Before we broke for lunch, there was a series of questions around the sale of this building last time and the purchase and whether the group was interested or not. And I believe that there was some clarifying information that I would just ask a member of the group to step up and share since that became such a topic. Is that okay?
That would be fine. You can come up to the microphone and clarify the information for us.
Thank you. My name's Dennis Gordon, and I'm with Save the Fort. And a statement was made by Save the Fort's attorney that nobody tried to purchase that property, but yet Save the Fort and Tate Jones in the Northern Rockies Heritage Center made an attempt to purchase that property, and we were working with the CDC at that time. The fellow's name was Hal, and Tate and I went over there and went through the whole building, and he said that he had an offer of mine that he wanted $550,000 for this property. So Tate and I got together and we were going to figure out some way that perhaps he could use it for the Northern Rockies as a visitor center, or else we could relocate the military museum into that building. But so then what happened was, the next thing I know, without Hal contacting me, there was a for sale sign around the building that was placed there by Lambros, and the listing agent was Chuck Meisinger. And I called Mr. Meisinger and I asked him about that building, and he said that, well, they had it for sale now for $900,000. That's what they were asking for it. So that pretty much just broke his promise to us that we would have an opportunity to buy it. So we never really had a chance to even make an offer on it, although we were definitely prepared to do so. So I hope that clarifies that.
I appreciate.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate that clarification. Sandy, do you have a question?
Yeah, I just wanted to be clear on what our role is here. We can only, I guess, change the ruling.
I'm going to get to, you want to wait just a second?
Yes.
So, okay. In fact, Claire, I had a request for the possible routes that we would take in this to be put up on the screen. This was emailed out. Claire, if you want to do that now, just so the public understands it and so council can take a look at it. Would that tell me if this does not suffice what your question was, Sandy? All right, so okay. So we could overturn the HPC's decision and approve the permit, or approve the permit with conditions. And Ryan might want to, the conditions need to be, you had some word for that earlier, not insignificant, I guess, or something along those lines. I'll let you look for your paperwork and then I'll keep going. The other option is to uphold the denial of the historic preservation permit. Just say they were right, we don't find any errors. Or remand the historic preservation permit decision back to the HPC with some direction for reconsideration based on City Council's finding. City Council's decision must be supported by written findings of facts. So if we were to overturn the HPC's decision, we could just send it back to LUP and work on that in the coming months and work on kind of how we how, well, what our decision is in that. So did you want to add something to that?
No, the language from the code is you can approve it with conditions if the conditions aren't more than minor modifications to the plans for the proposed action.
Okay, that's what, if we're gonna just approve it without sending it back to committee for work, it needs to have just minor and that's up for some level of interpretation, I think. Mike, do you want to add to that?
No, I just want to ask a quick question. If the council decided to overturn the HP decision and approve it with conditions, but wanted to start over for consideration, that is technically an option too, is it not?
When you say start over, what do you mean?
What did you use the term de novo, or like? I guess let's just.
You don't have to start over. No.
Okay.
You could find that the HPC erred. I think you'd need to make some findings as to the error, and then you could issue a decision on the permits, either to deny them on other grounds or to approve them based on your findings that the project meets the review criteria. You might need to spend some time laying the groundwork and the foundation for that decision, which maybe that's what you mean by start over. But the applicant submitted proposed findings of facts. We have findings of facts. There's an avenue that council could take where you simply find you disagree with some of the conclusions in the city's finding of facts, and say that despite the density of these buildings, the project does not adversely affect the setting and character and whatever. You'd have to do some of that work. You could direct staff to produce something for you. You could direct the applicant to modify their proposed findings of fact and then submit them back for you for consideration, or somebody on council could volunteer to do that, which is I think what happened in the Merck proceeding. So there's a variety of ways. You just want to make sure that if you were going to overturn the HPC decision, that you found an error and then you made your own findings to support your new decision.
Okay, that answers my question.
Thanks. So, we don't have to submit the finding of facts today if that's the direction we go. We're going to make some comments, and my suggestion how we go forward would be, if that is the case, that we overturn the ruling, that we go to staff to, draft to help us draft the finding of facts based on what we say and what we submit. So, Sandy, that's clear as mud, I'm sure. Let's take a round right now just to ask questions on the process, because it is, none of us have done this before. So I think that we probably all have some questions around it.
Yeah, I appreciate that. So we can only overturn the verdict, I guess, of the HPC if we find that they had erred. Is that correct?
That's correct. And
so I'm sorry, Ryan, were you going to say something?
Yeah, that's what the city code says. There's a burden of proof on the applicant to show that the HPC erred, and you're supposed to grant some deference to the HPC decision.
So, follow up. So since there was a lot of information today, and honestly a lot of information throughout this entire process, I was wondering if the applicant could briefly summarize, very quickly and briefly summarize where they think the HPC erred.
I don't have a problem with that unless someone else does. I think we've been talking about going back and forth on that a bit. I think that's the whole. Does anyone have a thought on that? I think Mirta, go ahead.
Can we just stick to asking the questions about the process and then getting clarification, because that way we don't.
Yeah, let's continue that, and then I'm
time.
going to come back to that question. Mirta, you're next anyway.
Yeah, my next question is, one of the possibilities here is to overturn the HPC decision and approve the permit or approve it with conditions. For those conditions, do we need to have findings of fact?
You would probably want to have some finding as to how the conditions help the project meet the review criteria. So if it's changing the siding or the color of the building or the color of the roofing materials, how that factors into meeting the review criteria in the 3 sets of review regulations.
And is council the one doing that, or do we work with staff on that?
I think you could do it either way. I mean, you could make findings on the record at this meeting along the lines of what I just said. And, you can go through the conditions, why you think they meet the criteria, and then based on the totality of the changes that are made, that you feel that the project is meets the review criteria.
Okay, thank you.
Or you could ask staff to summarize your findings and bring it back.
Okay, thanks.
Kristen, go ahead.
Thank you. I'm just curious, if we, regardless of which decision we arrive at, are we at risk of opening the city up for a lawsuit, regardless of which direction we go?
I would counsel against that factoring into your decision. I think you're just as liable to be subject to a lawsuit on either side.
Okay. And just because I see a hand up online, we are going to, until there's a motion on the floor, we will not be taking public comment until there's a motion on the floor, and then we'll take public comment on whatever that motion might be. Kristen, if you're done, do you mind lowering your hand just so I can keep us? So let's go back to Sandy's question. We did have presentations from both sides. We did have multiple, 2 briefs from both sides, findings of facts from both sides. Is there, I'm just wondering what additional information we would get there, and if we should, how do people, I'm going to let people weigh in on that. So I'm trying to think this through, whether, we have had questions answered today. I think some of those questions were probably and also submitted in writing. Some of the answers to those questions were submitted in writing. So you look like you're by your microphone, so you say whatever you need to say.
Yeah, I understand that a lot of all the questions were answered in depth. However, since I was just hoping for like a quick, 30-second, just quick overview, summarizing where, just listing them out, where they thought they erred.
Okay, I think that, it's a request from council, so I think that is, I'll rule that in order, I guess. So would the appellant like to come up and give a brief summary, not of the, how good the project is, but where just staying specific to where that you believe the error occurred on the HPC?
Make sure the microphone's on.
We've put where we think the errors occurred in our filings. And if you look at the brief that we filed before the last hearing, there were 3 sections in there that dealt with the 3 legal areas where the design review comes from, the 2 ordinances from the city and the secretary's standards. And just to quickly summarize those, we felt there were errors in each of those, in the application of each of those laws that centered around the definition of what the core of the Fort Missoula Historic District is, because that goes to quite a few of the criteria that have to be decided. The role of open space out there, or prairie, or whatever you want to call it, the undeveloped portion, and we explain why we feel that basically that boils down to a position by staff in the commission that there shouldn't be any change out there. The overarching kind of context for all this too, we feel, is the question of fairness. I'm not going to belabor that. It's in our filings. Today, we submitted those alternatives or considerations, and which we consider to be minor. And let me address that briefly. If you look at the public comment, 99% of it is about residential use. And things around the periphery of that really, I think you've heard today, aren't part of the decision at this point. So certainly if you take the things that we're offering to be part of a decision that imposes conditions. If you take those, they, and you're concerned about whether or not they're minor, I mean, we feel they are, and I guess I would say we're the ones in the best position to judge in a way, because it's our project, and but beyond that, they're certainly minor when it comes to any of the concerns that have been expressed by, most of the concerns have been expressed by the public. So there's errors in the application of those laws. We didn't feel we got a fair shake in them being applied from the get-go because of the bias or concern, however you want to put it, about residential housing. And we've offered a way to go forward together to try to solve this conundrum.
Okay, thank you. Does that feel sufficient for you? Okay. Looking around, I don't see any hands up by council people. So, okay, so we have some, excuse me, general idea about where what our options are. And I think we've had all of our questions answered. So at this point, the plan was to go into deliberations. We're doing this a little differently than we have done because there's not a one specific motion that can be put on the floor, as we normally have in items that come before us. I think what I'd like to do now is to kind of go around the horseshoe and discuss, deliberate, whatever we want to name this, do a temperature check, kind of whatever we want to kind of call it, around what kind of is rising to the surface for you of your, I guess, whoever wants to do it. We don't have to go all the way around the horseshoe. Things that you're concerned about and things that you're thinking about. If people don't want to do that, I'd like you to just kind of raise your hand and get in line to do it. If people don't want to do that, then, it's time for someone to put a motion on the floor. So go ahead, Kristen.
I apologize, but I love temperature checks normally, but I'm curious why we're doing one now.
Well, I guess mainly we don't have to. So we don't have to. We said we were going to deliberate, but we could call it a deliberation, and we can just call it a deliberation, and deliberating where we are with things before someone makes a motion, or someone can just go ahead, and now I have hands up, someone can just go ahead and make a motion, and then we can take public comment on that motion, and then we can deliberate it. It is a little bit different because there are different directions we can go in this. Ryan's about to tell me I can't do this. I have this feeling. Okay, Ryan.
No, I just want to make sure that when whatever direction you go, you remember that there are two decisions you need to make. There's the new construction alteration permit, and there's the demolition permit. So I don't know how to factor that into your decision-making on process, but just, I suppose, keep that in mind.
Okay, I appreciate that. I thought for sure you were going to tell me I couldn't do that. Okay, so I don't know if these are questions because people want to start talking, or if people have a different idea of the direction to go, but I'm going to start with Mike.
Thank you, Madam President. I think this is a great first step in kind of just, I would like to hear what some of my colleagues' reactions are and see if that brings out more questions or see if we're understanding things the same way. And I think that's a good start for something like this because it is.
Thanks. I appreciate that. And can I add one more thing really quickly?
And then I'll go.
And then you're going to go. Thank you. I also want to add that council has been very, very careful to not discuss this outside of these public meetings. And this, I have no sense of how you guys are feeling. I have no sense of how you're going to vote. I don't know where this is going to go. And I think that's exactly where we should be right now because we are not allowed to discuss this. We've discussed how the process is going to go, how we're going to take it, what our decision space is, but we have not discussed how we're feeling about this. So, that's a piece of it, I guess, Kristen, as well, is that this has not been something we've been able to discuss, quorum or no quorum. I mean, a lot of things you and I can chat about, you know, if we don't have a quorum off the record, but this is not one. So that's why. Mike, go ahead.
I have no idea what I want to do, so I really would just like to hear what other council members have to say. I have always, even prior to being on council, I've always found the historical preservation process very confusing. And I think some of that is the reality of you don't know what steps you need to take to preserve something until you're in that situation. So I think unlike a lot of other pieces of land use, it's hard to have exact, I mean, there's obviously room for subjective opinions and you know, different people have different takes on things. So I kind of recognize the frustration around the room on comments around that front. One of the things that just came up over and over again in kind of public comment and has been referenced a lot in some of the conversation from some of the relevant parties is this topic of housing at the fort. And I mean, it's clear to me that even though that is not in our decision space, just the buildings that may or may not be residential, that a huge crux of this comes down to people who think there should be the opportunity for housing at the fort and people who think there should be no housing at the fort. And that's a tough one to answer because I think ultimately that's the lens that this decision is going to be viewed in, whether that's what we base it on or not. So that is tough. I also, one thing that has struck with me is during the public comment at our hearing a couple Monday nights ago, someone got up and talked about how this is the fourth time they've fought against this and, you know, saving the fort. And I walked through that hospital yesterday and I honestly just have to wonder, what's the end goal? That is going to take a massive effort. And at some point, you know, whether it's this project or another project or someone's going to have to organize and do something about it, or it is going to become functionally obsolete more so than it is now. And I don't even think that, I mean, at some point, I don't even think it's fair to call it negligence because it's hard to pay to restore a building when there's, you know, some limits on what you can do with that. That being said, I think that there are some parts of this application that seem frustrating. I mean, we're obviously getting different versions of how kind of some of these conversations have gone. But it's clear that it, in some way, shape, or form, with some representatives of the applicant, the HPC made some suggestions that maybe the current architect wasn't part of those conversations, and then there's coming up now. And I wish that we had the ability, and maybe it's something I want to play out a little bit after some of these conversations, to kind of make everybody go sit in a room and figure out if they can come up with a solution and come back to us. Because it seems like just saying no and waiting for another group to come along and save this building, I don't know. We saw that the owners that owned it prior to the current applicant only used one floor, and they basically sealed off the upstairs and downstairs. You know, and that obviously that was a nonprofit mental health focused organization. So, I mean, it's going to take a really interesting group to be able to come in and put the money into that building to do something with it. And it's all interrelated. I will say that I find the conversation around the HPC's decision to say that the applicant didn't do enough to try and sell the building, the garage, to be ridiculous. I think that I don't think there's any way that if there were people on that committee that didn't want that to happen, that they couldn't use that to say, oh, you didn't go far enough. And I think that, I mean, it was listed in the multiple listing service. They hired a licensed professional to sell it. I mean, at some point there has to be some acknowledgement that they made an attempt to sell it under the ways that, you know, this is required to do. You could, you know, anybody could probably go look it up and still see the record of it being for sale. So, I mean, that part sits with me. I kind of think that the board probably erred in the garage part. I still have all sorts of questions about view sheds and the density of the buildings that aren't housing but probably are, and how that all fits in, especially with some of the comments kind of at the end that, factoring in density is a relevant piece per historic preservation codes and standards and things like that. So, I don't know where I'm going with that, but those are the things that I'm struggling with right now, is just kind of how this decision is perceived versus what the decision actually is. So,
Welcome to City Council. And you are not new at all. Okay, so Sandy, go ahead.
I think Stacy was before me.
Oh, well, Stacy, her
Oh, she took her
hand's
hand
down,
down. Okay,
so it's you.
I'll go then. I agree with a lot of what Mike said regarding saving the hospital. Like, what is the end goal with that? Because looking through it yesterday, it was really eye-opening, and it's not doing too hot, that hospital. But I am really curious. It's been incredibly difficult not to discuss this with anybody, so just myself. So I'm curious to see how the HPC feels about the 5 conditions that were presented to us today. If you could go back in time and speak for the entire HPC, would you have allowed this development to proceed if these conditions were presented then? I'm also curious because constituents have reached out to me about the road and the concerns about the road because it's already in poor shape. So what if there's any, I don't like adding public infrastructure advancements to private developers on their land. I'm just wondering if there was any talk about improving the road there regarding, I know it's a county road, but I'm just curious about that. I am leaning towards, personally, I am leaning towards wanting to overturn the HPC ruling, but obviously my mind can change based on what everybody around the horseshoe says and what public comment says and answers to any of the questions that I just presented. I'm with Mike here. I don't really have a solid plan on how I'm going to go, but that is my temperature check, I guess.
Thanks, Sandy. I appreciate everyone's willingness to kind of go around and do it this way too. I think it's probably helping all of us think the issue through. Mirta, go ahead.
Oh, I wasn't counting on going this soon, but
I can.
it's okay. I just a couple of thoughts is that I oftentimes think about all the special places that we want to go visit. We go to some of us who are fortunate enough can visit places where the old and the new come together, and that attracts a lot of people, and that's what makes it special. So I have a sincere interest in historic preservation. I think it contributes to the fabric and the character of the places that we love. They don't happen by accident. They happen because someone in an entity preserves them and puts time, interest, money into making that preservation possible. So I really appreciate the opportunity that we have here with this, with the fort in general, but with this specific project. But there's a real the demolition by neglect is a real potential outcome, and I think we need to think about that in preserving those places that are special to us. What is the mechanism that we have before us? I also spent quite a bit of time reading all the materials and all the comment, and I want to say thank you to our staff. I think they provided a significant amount of detail and thoughtful recommendations throughout this entire process, and I really do appreciate the changes that are being potentially proposed by the applicant. I wish they would have come sooner, and I know that you feel that you were not told in very specific terms what it is that staff was asking for. But as a non-architect, it was very clear to me when reading that what was being presented was not what was going to get this project to a level of compliance with the historic preservation recommendations and guidelines. And so I feel like it came a little late. That's not to say that I don't appreciate it and that I can work with what you're proposing. And lastly, I completely agree with Mr. Nugent and Ms. Vasica that, you know, I don't agree with the HBC's decision to deny the garage demolition permit. I think that when you really want something, you go after it and you find ways to create the connections to retain a building if you think it's really important. I think that the applicant made an effort to meet with those requirements. And so for me, that part of it is clear that I don't agree with. I think the burden on the developer, on the applicant has been met. But I don't know how I'm gonna wait for all of you to provide more information, I guess, before I make a final decision. But these are my thoughts so far.
Thanks. Bob, do you want to go ahead?
Thank you, Madam President. I guess I'll start with the garage. As my colleague said, and I agree with, I think, quite frankly, no-brainer. I think the applicant did their due diligence with regard to placing the building for sale and doing what they needed to do to remediate that condition and to place the building on the market. I think they met all the benchmarks that a reasonable person, you know, using that language in a legalese type of format, you know, did what they needed to do to address that issue. So I would concur with the HBC being in error with regards to the garage. With regards to the other part of the project, my concerns, I'm concerned, number one, about equal application of the HPC permitting process with regard to other buildings that have been recently approved there and in the past number of years. I've taken an opportunity to go out there separately to look at some of those designated features, like the buildings next to the golf course, the rail engine covering as the other buildings in closer to that central historic district that I see the foundation to the ground, but I'm really concerned. I actually, when I went out there, especially the buildings by the golf course, I had to look at my map, look at the buildings, look at my map, look at the buildings, and I'm wondering if I'm even at the right spot, because I'm looking at those buildings and they're simple steel construction buildings, steel-sided, steel roofing. They could be any building that I might go out and see on Railroad Street or Trade Street or Commerce Street, and I don't see any regard to any sort of historic consideration or preservation with those buildings, albeit they needed a permit, and nonetheless they were authorized and erected at those locations. So I have concern with that. With regard to view shed, I don't quite buy that the buildings that are proposed there, by looking at the plans, the architectural renderings, the elevation plans, the site plan map of the proposed development would be a substantial interference to the view of the old post hospital as it now stands. That's strictly my feeling. I heard that comment, and I think of just the courthouse, across the way here. I go out the front door, and I look in that direction. My eyes immediately drawn to that historic courthouse building, the old original courthouse. And, we've had that, I'll call it an eyesore of an annex, sometime, I guess it was the 70s. But to me, it doesn't matter where you're looking at, from Ryman Street, Broadway, Woody, or even from City Hall behind, or, the first thing I see when I go out is I see that old white historic courthouse building, irregardless of the fact that we have a 4-story annex that was added on sometime after. So I don't think the project as rendered, at least, and configured with regards to elevation, with regards to square footage, would in any way detract from the view shed of the old post hospital. And then finally, of course, I made a lot of statements about, my concerns about communication between the HPC, other parties, other interest groups. And I found that concerning. Do I believe it's risen to the level of, I've thrown the term out there, I'll own it, smoking gun. There's no smoke in the room. I think it's a cautionary tale, though, for groups like the HPC or for us or for me as a new council person. It's a really good lesson learned for me early on council here, the importance of abiding by ex parte and land use decisions and just being mindful of that going forward. And that's, to council, that's to planning board, that's to HPC or any other board that involves themselves in land use decisions. And I think care has to be taken with that. And, I spent most of my life being paid in some ways to be suspicious of things I got no reason to be suspicious of, so to speak. And, this is certainly an area, kind of stuck out in my mind. And, it didn't pass initially my smell test, but at the end of the day, we are dealing with just circumstantial evidence in this regard. So I don't think it rises to the level of anything nefarious or anything intentional or anything like that. But going forward, I think we do have to look at those kinds of things insofar as, transparency between committees and, be it with email or anything else. So, we don't let that ever become an issue with, major decisions like this. So yeah, I guess that's my 2 cents. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Bob. And that's why in every email I'm like, don't reply all. If you want to reply to me, reply to me. Not about this matter, but about other things. So Stacy, go ahead.
Thanks, Madam Chair. Thanks for my colleagues for kind of giving an initial blush at how this is all landing. I have a tendency to agree that maybe denying the permit for demolition of the garage was an error. I do think that some of the questions that Ms. Becerra brought up earlier in regards to, just simply listing it as, one flat price and not really working with some of the groups seemed a little bit disingenuous, but I guess if someone really cared enough about it, they could have tried to engage in the conversation with the owner, seller of that. In regards to the larger issue at hand, I think I have really tried to focus on the review and not the use, which is obviously really hard given that the majority of, the comment that we received, especially on the first, and I think that was February 5th, looking at my calendar. So much of the comments when I was writing notes down of what they were saying, I was like, oh, that's a use issue. That's a use comment. And so, in looking and reading through the briefs and hearing the comments from the historic preservation officer and hearing from the applicant, I am not convinced that they erred in their assessment of the project. I think, and it does put us in a super awkward position right now because we're now at the 11th hour being, presented with like, okay, we could do this instead. Well, that is not in our purview at the moment to really take that into consideration. And so I think that I am very concerned about the demolition by neglect of this historic place. I, am, a huge fan of historic buildings and repurposing them and things having new life. I think that there is a project out there that can be had. I'm just not feeling like this particular project is it. especially with the housing component. It doesn't mean that I'm opposed to housing out at the port. I don't think that that's a carte blanche statement. I just, I can see from kind of the criteria that they were looking at in the lens of, kind of keeping with the historic feel of that area, that the housing particularly doesn't seem to kind of blend in or mesh or meet the criteria. So, I don't feel as though, the whole difference in size and timelines of applications. I mean, this is a huge project that would fundamentally change how the area is used, the land use, the, daily trips. Of course, that application is going to be exponentially bigger, the process longer versus, putting up a roof to protect, the locomotive part. I mean, so I don't really feel like that is a criteria that, I felt that was a little disingenuous. So I might have shared my hand, but I figured that's what we're here for. I'd love to hear kind of like, how do we muddle forward with kind of recognizing that there is a potential to do something out there versus leaving it just as it is. But in terms of finding where, given the criteria from my understanding and reading through everything that the Historic Preservation Committee was looking at, I don't find error in their main, decision on the new permit. So those are my thoughts.
Thanks. And I want to make a point. I'll speak after everyone else, but the changes in what they've submitted, while I would agree they look more in line, to my untrained eye, in line with kind of the buildings around it. I don't think these changes would suffice. I don't think HPC, just because these changes were there, would have permitted this based on all the other things that have been said today. That this doesn't make any difference in the prominence. It doesn't make any difference in the open space feel. It's just the look of the building. So I hear what everyone's saying, and I agree with a lot of that, but I don't think that was just one of the findings. Kristen, do you want to, Chris, and Stacy, if you don't mind lowering your hand, then Kristen, go ahead.
Thank you. I just think it's really hard to think about, to separate out the proposed use from this project versus the issues at hand. It's just impossible for me, to be quite honest, because, I think, as some of my other colleagues mentioned, what is the end goal here if we deny this? What's going to happen to the hospital? And if we're all interested in preserving history, currently the hospital is sitting on private property, and I'm curious what other options there are to address this building that is falling into disrepair. And the longer it goes without being addressed, the harder it is to repair it, and it's going to cost more. And I really did enjoy walking through that yesterday, the building. I do love history, even though I'm not a history buff. I love old buildings. I love preserving history, and I do really see the value in preserving history, particularly this piece, because of the links to World War II and the internment and what we've learned about our racist history. But we are also in a housing crisis in Missoula. It is a legitimate, actual housing crisis for which our local experts are in agreement with national experts that the only response is to increase the supply. We have city staff and frontline service providers who are the backbone of our community who cannot afford to live here. I worry that the HBC requirements are a little too stiff and rigid in this context. I love that there are really solid rules for how to preserve buildings, but I wish that we could consider the context of a town, and the context of our town is that people can't afford to live here. And we have a little bit of an ultimate solution in this development. I wish we could leave things the way they were. Like I said, I think context and nuance are really important in development decisions, and ultimately this is private property. I think the conditions for denying the proposed development do not apply in other neighborhoods, of course. This proposed development would most likely get approved if it were within city limits. And I think about my ward, particularly, it's Ward 6, which is getting more and more dense every week, basically, without essential infrastructure improvements in response to that density. And we're missing miles of sidewalks and essential walking routes, and we're missing essential traffic modification interventions, which would slow drivers down in high density neighborhoods. And like I said, it's super hard to consider the issue in our purview without thinking about the proposed use. And I think, quite frankly, I am in support of overturning the decision with conditions requiring the developer to match the style and ambiance, and anything else that comes up through discussions as much as legally possible.
Thanks. If you don't mind lowering your hand, that'd be good. And then Sierra, go ahead.
Yeah, thanks. I don't want to be repetitive here, but I think, again, we have to really consider what we're being asked to look at. And I know that it is hard to take out use and potential revenue, tax revenue, but that is what we're being asked to do. We are literally looking at whether a board of volunteers that we asked to be the subject matter experts, if they did their job, if they actually looked at this application fairly and used the correct design standards. And I guess I'm kind of looking at it that way, that I think that I'm not seeing where they erred. I don't see the thread of ex parte or conflict of interest. I don't think that's a clear thread to me. And I also think that they did use the correct design standards and gave us an explanation and told us why. So I'm looking at it that way. I know that I hear Ms. Jordan's concerns about housing and density, but we are not actually considering that right now. So I think that I'm kind of leaning a little bit towards kind of the two parts, I guess, would be to me to approve the appeal for the demolition, but to deny the appeal for the new construction. That's not necessarily a motion, but that's pretty close to one. And that's where I'm sitting right now. So,
Thank you. Daniel, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to say that developments like this are good for the community. We need housing and mixed-use neighborhoods. And I would like to see our residential and commercial zones around town allow for developments like this. I'm not necessarily in support of turning open space into developments, but this is also private land, so keep that in mind. But if we're going to make the motion to overturn the Historic Preservation Commission's decision, I would like attached to that motion a specific thing that they did wrong, or because that's what the decision is supposed to be on, is something that they made a mistake in the process. So if somebody's going to make that motion to overturn the decision, I would like to see the specific reason of why, and yeah, I just wanted to add that. That's all.
I was worried you were going to make a motion before I got to make a comment. And I'm going to go before you, and then I'll let you go, Kristen. Really appreciate hearing everyone's comments. And if you could see all my notes and drawing, I look like I have a much more chaotic mind than I actually do up here. But it's because so many things have kind of resonated with me today in different ways. I'm really... I don't know completely where I am either. I'm really struggling with the subjectivity of some of the decisions that were made, the prominence of the hospital. It still seems prominent to me, so I mean, I think that's really like looking at the design. So that seems really subjective. And I mean, I think that could be an error. The sight line, the view shed, that I mean, I'm not going to go into all the reasons because some of you have already articulated those. That seems like that is that is a really subjective thing. Like I said, like what's the height, what's the distance? Like those would make this decision way easier for us. The prairie aspect of it, I don't know how big a prairie has to be, right? Like, I mean, it's really not in, if you look at the whole area, it's not in a prairie anymore anyways. You know, at this point, it is really hard to separate the use because we do need housing. And to be honest, I really care about the bird area. But, you know, I'm a conservationist. I care about that part of it. But I really can't bring that into my decision-making space right now. And I think my colleagues have made really good points. Like, what is the end goal? Like, historic preservation should be to preserve that building, right? That seems like historic preservation. That seems like that should be one of the main things that we are looking at, is how do we approve a project that is actually going to restore that building? So that's something. The garage, I agree with Mr. Nugent. On the garage, I think that feels like maybe it wasn't everything they could do to list it, but it was enough that it would meet what I think the criteria is. Yeah, I didn't mean to be snarky about saying something about being welcome to city council, but this does feel like it is. You know, I hope out of this that whatever is decided and however we move forward, that it is kind of that the public does understand what our decision space was. And I said decision space to my husband this morning, and he was like, that is such a politician's word. Like he was kind of disgusted with me saying that, but I said that's what it is. It's where we can make the decision. So I guess that's I appreciate staff's work on this, and I know that this has been a hard one for council. I also just want to say that I appreciate that council really has, as far as I know, not talked about it. Like everyone, no one's approached me to talk about it. No one's tried to, like, you know, it has been, and that's hard because we do collaborate. I mean, we do collaborate and discuss our ideas on matters that we are able to. So I think we've done a good job with that as we've muddled through a process that a lot of us didn't understand starting out. So that's not an answer to where I am, but I'm okay. Kristen.
All right. I move to approve the permit and send this back to LUP to work on conditions attached to approving these permits.
So you're moving to overturn.
I'm moving to
overturn the decision, not.
Thank you. I'm moving to overturn the decision, but I would like to, if possible, take it back to LUP to really discuss the conditions that we'd like to see attached to this. And I'm not do that. But
Mike's raised. Mike, you.
I want to clarify your motion. Are you moving to overturn both decisions and send them both back to LUP?
Yes. Thank you. I move to overturn both decisions and send it back to LUP for further discussion.
Okay, we have a motion on the floor, and since we have a motion on the floor, I'm going to now go to public comment. Would you like to be the first one to comment on that motion when we come back? If you don't want to, leave your hand up if you want to be. Otherwise, I'm going to go. Okay, so we have a motion on the floor, and we're going to go to public comment, and I'm going to give some rules around public comment. It is going to be 3 minutes. I have a timer right here to my left. You're going to need to finish up, not a long thought when it hits 3 minutes, but finish a sentence or two to close up. I'm not going to cut your microphone off at 2 minutes or 3 minutes. But, you know, please, I know there's some passion around this issue. I ask that people keep their comments respectful. Please address me as the chair, and yeah, stay on topic to what, as my husband hates, is our decision-making space. Oh, and state your name. I know you keep saying it, and spell it for the record.
Yeah, members of the council, Ross Keogh on behalf of Save the Fort. I want to be really mindful of the monumental task that it'll take to save this hospital. And it will not be accomplished with the minimal amount of additional developments the developer has proposed. There's just not enough money on the table. If you want this hospital saved, where that will take place is at the Historic Preservation Commission with the developer who is willing to engage and coordinate with the broader community. That is not what has happened to date. And I am concerned, and I think Ryan said it earlier, about the incentives that you are sending and the signals that you are sending if the developers are allowed to bypass your appointed board. There is a whole slate of resources here. There's resources in the country that we can mobilize to help create an outcome that works for the parties at hand. But you need a cooperative process to that, and that should have taken place at the HPC. Sending proposed additions and changes 12 hours before a hearing starts, maybe 16 hours before a hearing starts, indicates that you don't have a developer that wants to engage in that sort of process. And you shouldn't reward that type of behavior. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, thank you for your time. My name again is Leah Trahan. And I just wanted to, I'll be very brief, but I just wanted to address a few things because I think what I heard was some concern about the HPC's decision-making process on the demolition permit, and perhaps that's coloring the view of some of their other decisions and deliberations. So if I could just clarify briefly, I did attend those meetings, and I just wanted to point out that at the meetings, the HPC heard testimony from the developer, which emphasized over and over and over again the lack of value of the shed, and they also heard testimony from interested parties that said that they didn't think donation was a possibility due to the $40,000 price. So there was some information before the HPC that made them a little bit concerned, and given the gravity of the demolition of a historic resource, I mean, I think they really deliberated and thought about that carefully. And I did just want to point out, since you are dealing with kind of dueling narratives, I just wanted to present that side of it, and also just point out that developer said in his response to one of your questions regarding the demolition permit that there was no discussion at all, and that is just false. So I just hope you'll take some of the things that are said with a grain of salt that aren't supported by evidence in the record. Thank you.
Thank you. I have to assume we have more people that want to comment. Please come up.
My name's Dennis Gordon with Save the Fort. And all I've heard during this meeting for the past, since it began at 9 o'clock, is what's going to happen to the hospital? Well, what's going to happen to the people who recreate at the fort? Doesn't human life have any value to anybody? At the February 5 public hearing pertaining to this appeal, I exhorted you, council members, to drive the road which this project intends to use for the condos and to bring the public to the restaurants at the facility. I hope by now you have all driven the road and seen its dilapidated state, which I have closely observed over a 20-year period working as a volunteer at the fort. If you have not done so, you lack the knowledge of the threat that each of your constituents faces when recreating at historic Fort Missoula. The safety of each of your constituents, be it a young child or a senior citizen, falls under your purview, and you are duly sworn to protect each one of them from any latent danger or threat. I truly believe if you do not deny Wolf's project and the threat it poses to your constituents, one day you will read in the obituaries of a young child who was struck and killed by your inaction on this road out here. Mr. Nugent, God forbid one of those children should be your child. And then Mr.
Sir,
Wolf
please avoid, make your comments to me.
I'm sorry.
And I think that is kind of directly, unnecessarily pulling out a council member.
All
So I'm going to ask you to refrain from that.
All right, okay. Anyway,
And
in just summing up, Mr. Wolf plans to use these roads at the fort to conduct his business. He owns none of those roads. They're all in horrible shape. He's going to try and drive another road into his property. So how are people going to get around that?
Okay, thank you. You're over 3 minutes now. Thank you.
Thank you.
Next.
Thank you for your time.
Thank you, council, for at least hearing our words. So, I've been involved with
And
the
please,
historical.
please state your
Oh,
name
I'm
and
sorry.
that's okay, and spell
My
the
first
last
This
name.
is my first time. So, my name is Scott Kuehn, Kuehn. I've been involved out there at the Historical Museum for over 30 years. And some of the buildings that were referenced today as being unfair process in HCP, some of those I helped build. The shed over the locomotive, the Woodsmith team building. Is my understanding that the HCP, if it's county-owned property, the HCP does not have to, we do not have to go through the HCP. That's my understanding. It might be different. That is correct? Okay. So there was fairness brought up that the buildings that we built on the museum property, even though we did go through the HCP process, we didn't need to. So I think that's where that fairness needs to be brought up a little bit more. The private property rights, I understand that, but developers knew what they were getting into with the historic overlay. So the garage is falling down, but to say they sold, trying to sell it for $40,000 and say they made a bona fide good effort. As far as I can tell, talking to the neighbors, they didn't, the developers did not reach out to any other neighbors if they wanted it. One of the things we work on 100-year-old equipment is the term arrested decay. You stop the decay so it doesn't get any worse. If the developers have had this property for 4 or 5 years, the first thing I would have done is fix the roof. I don't think there's anybody in the preservation office that would have opposed fixing the roof for further, to eliminate further decay. That just doesn't sit right. That we've been allowing that roof to leak for 4 or 5 years without fixing it. So the roads, the housing, that's going to be under a zoning. I guess I would like the council to deny the motion on the floor. Thank you.
Thanks for your comments. Anyone else? Okay, yeah. Please kind of queue up because I'll go to online comments after we finish in the room.
Hi, Ann Rupp-Calvis, Ruppkalvis, Ann with an E. If you allow this development to proceed, due to the fact that this hospital development parcel is part of what has been designated an international site of conscience, which would imply reflection time, not busy, lots of family time, then you will be disappointing people all over the world. I don't know if you allow this development, lots of eyes are watching. If you decline the development, the developer will be disappointed. As far as the housing goes, and more housing for more people, which is needed. I took a tour of the site last summer. The group that I was a part of, one of the women asked Max, so how much will these places cost? And a quote was, a low ballpark would be $750,000. Now, I don't know how many people that work for the city are going to be able to buy into that. I appreciate the gravity of your considerations. I'm glad I don't have to make this decision, but I think you need to consider the entire area. This is a small part of the entire area. The entire area is an international site of conscience. There's a phrase came from the Forest Service, which is the greatest good for the greatest number. If you approve this development, the number of people that live in these houses, I'm sure would be thrilled. It's a lovely site. But when I consider people all over the world that are watching this via the international sites of conscience and the Japanese, I just would ask you to consider that.
Thank you.
My name's Richard Kaler, spelled K-E-H-L-E-R. I live up in the Moose Can Gully section. I'm a little bit dismayed about what's been put forth as a motion. We seem to be straying into we need more housing. What taxes would we get from this? It was simply, did the Historical Preservation Committee do its job? And I'm not going to address much about the garage because I don't know a lot of detail about that, but in regard to the larger project, I can't really find any substantial fault with what they did. And that's the only decision before the council right now. I will open my heart and say I am concerned about housing at the fort. I sometimes wonder why we have zoning rules in this town because we so often seem to just overturn them when the developer wanted something. I also look to the council to safeguard the investment that our tax dollars have made. All the money that we are asked to put forth to these different, open space and the fort and fairgrounds and everything, and then to turn around and think that we're going to open up the door to housing on the edge of it, I just don't understand it. And believe me, it's just opening the door. Then they'll be looking like, oh, what other plots are adjacent to this that we can turn into this? This is really what we want to do. So I think there's just simply enough feeling from the community that just, for not being technical, but it just doesn't feel right. So maybe there are other projects that can save the building. It would be nice. I do agree with the one gentleman saying new information at the 11th hour isn't really fair conduct. I think certainly it was allowed to get dilapidated. Why didn't we put a new roof on it? I think there was an overall plan and developers have a way of achieving their goals. I just don't think this is for the better good. But the main thing is there was really just a couple decisions today about whether the Preservation Committee did its job. I think they did a super job, and I think they're represented very well. And I think we're just getting tied up in other things that aren't really supposed to be part of the decision today. Thank you.
Thank you. Next person. Actually, yeah, just leave them there. Yeah, thanks.
Good afternoon. Tay Jones, Northern Rockies Heritage Center. Spelling is on the statement. General Phil Sheridan once remarked that given the choice between living in Hades or Texas, he would live in Hades and rent out Texas, but I am sure this project would convince him to reorder his priorities. The decision process is the core to this appeal, so on to that. FAE Wolf has complained at length about the fairness of the procedure. They have been given multiple opportunities to present their plans. The Heritage Center didn't get an hour-long field trip, learn from the mistakes of past failed projects and make adjustments. Irrespective, they have plowed forward, determined to shape an alternative reality in which Fort Missoula is an untidy semi-void, and to paraphrase a national figure of like mind, they alone can fix it. The results tell. If any history organization or professional of note has endorsed Fort Missoula Commons, they have done an extremely good job of camouflaging themselves. Rather, FAE Wolf, a purportedly preservationist organization, has found themselves at war with pretty much the entire Missoula preservationist community. This is the natural outcome of a corporate strategy described best by an HPC member last spring. They just don't listen. Turning to the raised questions of improper conflicts and contacts on HPC's part, we are now entering the 9th month of allegations, allusions, and innuendo, minus the presentation of any concrete evidence. It is absolutely intolerable that respected professionals who give of their time to serve unpaid on community boards should have to endure as condition of service a cloud over their heads inserted by a private land speculation company. So, unless it's now acceptable that the spirit of Roy Cohn guide these proceedings from his perch down below, I would submit it's high time on this matter that the appellants put up or shut up. Plentiful details against the appeal have been supplied, and rather than belabor, I will simply turn to the words of General Leonard Wood, who visited Fort Missoula on December 15, 1912. Quote, "First came the work of the landscape architect, and his plat was so designed as to take advantage of the natural topography of the military reserve, and at the same time to preserve and blend the artistic effects of the surrounding natural beauties. This made artistic landscape gardening and sanitary arrangements both easy and perfect, and the completed post with its Spanish architecture so well carried out, rather lending an impression not of a staid, old-fashioned fort, but of a great military park. If General Wood were to return and view this adversarial design, would he say the same? That is a chapter of Fort Missoula history this council will now have to write in 2024.
Oh, wow.
Right on timing-wise. Anyone else want to make public comment in the audience?
Hello, my name is Ross Best. This is a complex matter. In fact, it's two complex matters. And you have been unfair to the public by failing to separate those two appeals in your consideration. You've also been unfair to the public in allowing the appellant vastly more time than is allowed to the respondents. You haven't made a reasonable opportunity, you haven't allowed a reasonable opportunity to provide a reasonable clash of arguments and ideas and proof. The ordinance has two provisions that seem to be in conflict. One says only overturn if there are errors. The other says you have all the powers of the commission. It's a principle of statutory construction that when two provisions are in conflict, if possible, you reconcile them by looking to the most specific one, and that's the one dealing with appeal, the appeal process, and you subordinate the other provision to that. You should not be deciding that you want to overturn. You should be first deciding what errors they are. You've got your process backwards, the way you've described it so far. You're not making your findings of fact and conclusions of law and then voting on the ultimate decisions as you would if you were in an analogous situation and considering a resolution before the council. You are disregarding the expertise of the State Historic Preservation Officer, your officer, the city attorney, the Historic Preservation Commission, even though several of you have admitted you don't understand the process. Going through the proposed findings of fact and conclusions of law before making a decision should help you to clarify your decisions. The core problem with the proposed development is that it's too much building in the wrong place, in the wrong space. And even if there are lesser errors, even if there are minor errors, such as how the record of decision for the demolition was handled, you should not overturn the core of the commission's decision regarding the unsuitability of the hospital project and the surrounding buildings,
And your 3 minutes that was 3 minutes.
given the historic values that are at stake. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. Appreciate everyone wrapping up in 3 minutes. Are there any other comments in the room?
My name is Steve Bixby, B-I-X-B-Y. I just want to say one thing that has not been brought up yet, I think, and that is the possibility that this won't happen. This proposal allows the developer to do everything all together, all at once. And so they can start, it's said in there are 3 phases to this, but it isn't necessary to finish one phase before they begin on the next one. So in other words, they can, on day 1, start in on the hospital renovation, they can start in the commercial buildings, and on that same day they can start in on the residential. So, thank you. So what happens if 6 months down the line or 6 weeks down the line they find something's wrong with the hospital building and it cannot be repaired? We've seen this many, many times. We saw it with the Mercantile building. So let's not be fooled into thinking we're guaranteed that this post-hospital is going to be restored if they get this proposal through. So very, very possibly, I think we could end up with what very few of us want, and that is the commercial buildings and especially the residential ones, but not get the post-hospital. So I agree. If there's something the HPC did wrong, okay, let's look at that. But I think we're going off in a different direction here. Like I say, please consider the fact we might not end up with the hospital building even if you do approve this. Thank you.
Thanks, appreciate your comments. Anyone else in the room that has not commented already? Okay, so I don't see anyone else in the room, so I'm going to go to online comments. Please, you can put your hand up. I'm going to call on you in order. Mr. Larson, your microphone should be.
Hi, Matt Larson, Ward 3. Today is just another day of Byzantine-style meetings by the City Council where they bend over backwards for more developers to develop high-end developments at the price of the community. I agree with Mr. Best and his analysis of the City Council not really understanding at large what's going on here in the decision-making process and how they basically have everything backwards in this motion. I would say it's an easy motion to vote no on. The Historic Preservation Council is there for a reason, and typically it's not to be overturned by the City Council. So it's disheartening to see the City Council try and throw a motion out with no specific thing that was done wrong by the Historic Preservation. Again, we've seen this over and over with many developments. We've seen this at the 4th and Ronald development, and we see this constantly with spot zoning that happens across the city in various different neighborhoods without adequate parking or infrastructure involved. So this is an easy one to vote no on. The whole community's out basically telling you to do that. And I think you're convoluting your powers here in the discussion by mixing these signals, saying that you can't separate the use from the decision in front of you. If you can't do that, then I don't know what you're doing on City Council. Thanks.
Okay, thanks for your comments. I don't see any other hands up online. I'm going to do another call for any online comments. If you raise your hand, I can allow you to speak. Okay, I don't see any hands up. We don't have anyone that has not already wishing to make comments in the room, so I am going to officially close public comment on this item, which brings us back to council comments on the motion. And I'm going to first go to the person that made the motion, because your hand's still up, unless you don't want to say anything. Ms. Jordan.
Yeah, thank you. I just had a couple things to say in response. I'm appreciative of all the folks who provided comment, either in writing or who came down today. Just a couple things to follow up on. I think the thing that really strikes me the most is that we are talking about private property. This is private property. This man owns the hospital. He owns the property around it. It is private property. And that really strikes me as being something that we need to consider, and perhaps some of the Historic Preservation Commission policies might not be flexible enough to address the rights of private property owners. You know, and additionally, the landowner is going to fix the hospital, and this is a building that pretty much everybody in the room has agreed is an important piece of Missoula history, for which no other plan exists to fix. And finally, it is tough when when development goes in and potentially these homes are going to be on a higher price point than the average price point in Missoula. I don't know. It's hard to say at this point because we don't really know what the design's going to be. But quite frankly, what I've learned in a housing crisis and being on city council is that supply, nearly regardless of the price point, addresses housing affordability by addressing demand, which can ultimately make housing more affordable. And so I think it is a really messy issue, and there are multiple things that I think should be considered outside of the purview of really solid historic preservation, and largely that this is private property. So thank you.
Thanks, Daniel.
Yeah, I just had one question and then a comment. I'm curious, like, if what the council's reason is that the Historic Preservation Commission got wrong. Like, what is the specific thing that we're claiming that the Historic Preservation Commission did wrong? And I'd like to just hear staff's response to that. Does that make sense?
So I think there's one person as of right now that has made a motion. I feel like she kind of stated some of those, but if you would like to, council as a whole has not weighed in on this yet. So, and if we do weigh in on this, and we do vote to overturn the Historic Preservation Committee's ruling, then we have to do a finding of facts, and we will have to say why we voted that way and what the facts are around it. So we're not exactly there yet. I mean, if Kristen, if you would like to kind of respond to Mr. Carlino, that's fine. I don't, staff, if you want to say something, I'm happy for you to do that, but I feel like we have not, we haven't taken a vote, so I don't think all of council, we know that all of council, I think all of council does not necessarily feel that way based on what people said earlier.
Well, so I guess my question would just be, when would we do the findings of fact? Would that be today if we did vote?
Ryan, do you want to weigh in on what our options are there?
Yeah, I guess I'm a little concerned, and I think Daniel's question highlights that you're voting without. I mean, we've had a couple of suggestions as to why Ms. Jordan supports the motion, but those don't really serve as grounds to overturn it. So what I'm concerned about is that you're queuing up a process to vote to overturn the permits without significant justification for that, and then asking to come back with the justification, which I'm concerned will undermine the decision. If you were making a motion to direct staff to present or bring back, or have the applicant or somebody bring back a set of proposed findings based on some of the things that you're saying, and then you'd vote to overturn based on that, I think that would be a more defensible approach. But I am a little bit concerned that we're going down a path of something that's going to be very hard to defend if we were sued by somebody who wanted to challenge that decision.
Okay, so maybe I misunderstood kind of what our a possible path was forward, because my understanding was that we could all at this point right now, because there's a motion on the floor, could say give our reasons if we're voting for it. And then that would be turned into, at a later date, that would be turned into a written finding of fact.
Yes, definitely. But I think what Daniel highlights is, and maybe I'm jumping in too early because we've only heard one person, but
yeah, that's what I think. I think.
Okay, so I think it's important to vote to lay down the justifications as to how the HPC erred and on what grounds you think the review criteria were applied incorrectly and how you view those review criteria. You think the massing and size and texture shown in the application or as amended by these conditions meets the criteria, all those kinds of things.
Okay, so, and I think you have a comment on this specifically, Mike, so I am going to go to you, but I just want to say that I think that and I appreciate your comment, I mean, if you are going to vote to overturn it, we need to say why. So, and we can say why here. That's kind of what I outlined, I believe, as a process in the process email that I sent. But we need to say why, and that is going to be turned into a record of decision or finding a fact or whatever. Hold on. I'm sorry.
With all this new information, I have some things to add because this is a really new process.
No, I agree. Yeah, I agree. And I'm going to let you add those things to your comments.
Thank you.
But I think Mike has a comment on this process before you do that.
I was just going to say respectfully to the city attorney and many people in public comment, council hasn't even had the opportunity to say that we don't agree with the way Kristen's voting. So it kind of feels like we're getting lectured for something we haven't had the opportunity to say, no, we don't want to do that process. So I would just like to make sure the record's clear that council as a whole has not decided to do that. It was just a motion was put on the floor following Mason's, and I do have concerns about it, and I know several people on council probably do too.
Yeah, thanks. That's what I was that's what I was trying to say. I don't know that council as a body has weighed in. So you're gonna give us your reasons now, Kristen, if you would.
I guess so.
And so then let's just go around.
Yeah, I mean, this is. I just got kind of confused now then about the process because, given the email that we received from you, which was really great and high level about what kind of decisions we could make in this particular space. And with Ryan Sudbury's advice that we shouldn't make a decision based on, I mean, if I heard you correctly, you told us not to make a decision worrying about getting sued. Did I misunderstand that comment?
No, I just want to make sure that whatever decision you make is grounded in a set of findings that are defensible. So I don't think you should worry about which way you make your motion based on getting sued, but then once you make your motion, let's make sure that you back that up with the appropriate level of findings.
Okay. And I'm not a lawyer, but I mean, okay, if I need to give 2 reasons, I do struggle with the subjectivity of the visual line of sight requirement. It doesn't make sense to me that it's contextual. I want some numbers because depending on which angle you come in, you can see it, and it's a big building, it's white, and so that feels really subjective to me that the proposed use of the land may impede the visual aspect without seeing, like, you need to be able to see the building within 200 meters of every angle or 100 meters of 30% of every angle or something like that. Something that's a little more quantitative for me would make more sense. But the subjectivity of the visual aspect, it doesn't feel defensible to me. And the other piece is that I too argue or feel that what the process that they went through to try and address the garage was meaningful enough to meet the requirements. By those 2 reasons alone, I feel that we most likely have cause to overturn the decision and come back with some further conditions on the developer that would maybe find some middle ground between the concerns of the people who are opposed to the potential use of the land and the very high standard that the historic preservation requirements require. So those are my reasons.
Thanks, and I just want to, I'm reviewing the email, and you are correct, because how I had set it up is that we were going to, after deliberations, there would be a call for a motion, which you made the motion, public comment on that motion, and then council would have an opportunity to comment on that motion, and then I later on said in the email, here are the possible ways of going forward. If the motion is to overturn the HPC ruling and it passes, then council needs to go around and state their reasons. So I'm happy for us to state our reasons on the front end, but is that a problem if we state it after the vote as well? I mean, does it matter which way, and does anyone have a strong feeling on which way we do this? I'm happy for us to just do this before we vote on any motion that is proposed if this one doesn't pass.
Well, I think you can do it either way. I mean, another alternative would be to suggest, make the motion to direct staff to prepare a set of findings in line with what you've said, so that you can come back and review them and agree with them. Or alternatively, if you, having read the materials, agree with it, you could say, based on the findings proposed by the applicant in the applicant's filing, I mean, there's 30 pages of proposed findings and conclusions in there, that would also be fully defensible. If you said, we've read that and we agree with what the applicant has put forward as their proposed findings.
But you don't.
But if you're going to make a decision now, so sorry to interrupt.
No, go ahead. Keep going.
To overturn the permit, you should state the reasons for it before voting, I think.
Before voting, okay.
And then you could come back. Sorry again to interrupt. You could come back with whatever is prepared for you to review and say, yes, that's what we said.
Okay, that sounds fine. I apologize. I made it in my email, the process, I laid it out a little differently. I know that we need to do a finding of fact if we overturn anything. I was doing it after we voted. We're going to change that because we are a flexible body. We are going to do that on the front end. So I am going to go to Bob.
Thank you, Madam President. I guess I echo some of the same concerns of Councilman Carlino and just voiced by Mr. Sudbury. I think there is this cart before the house thing a little bit here that needs to be addressed first before we go down the road of, making particularly a decision if it is going to be to overturn. I think we need to have that up front. To me, it's kind of analogous of, I find you guilty. Now, give me a minute. I'll think of some reasons why I found you guilty. So that needs to be ironed out. I think it might be helpful to some degree to separate out, at least in my opinion, the two things we are considering here, which is the garage and then the old post hospital and the rest of the development that is entailed with that. I just think if we dealt with perhaps the garage separately first and go down that road and talk about why we find what we find and then render a decision on it, that might be a good roadmap to then go forward with the decision on a much larger, much more complex issue.
Kristen, would you be okay as a friendly amendment dividing that motion, the motion on the demolition and on the dividing the demolition and on the development? It'll be the same motion. They'll be just, we may even have to do that, to be honest. So, okay, so both of those motions then, if you're okay with that, and you can comment on either. We've already taken public comment on them together, so I'm looking at you for a head nod if that's okay to do that.
Well, I just heard you say we might actually have to do that, so I would like some further clarification.
Do we need them on
that,
two
please.
separate motions?
I think you could do it either way. I think it's cleaner to do it as two separate motions, but if you want to combine them, you're just voting on both of them together.
Yeah, okay. That's fine. Before we had a request to kind of do them separately. Let's finish talking about them and then we will be voting on them separately. So as you are making your considerations. You can make comments on both of, defend your position, I guess, on both of the different motions. And then Claire, as a housekeeping matter, we're going to vote on them separately.
Sorry, how did we just decide to make them two separate motions?
We're just going to make them, you're going to say, yes, I want them to be two separate motions.
Okay. I didn't realize I was going to do that.
That silent head nod, you said yes. That's how we did it.
That was, I think I would like to go around the table and hear folks speak to the value of separating them out, because currently here I can't make that decision right this second, so I'd like to hear what people have to say.
Okay, so would anyone, I'm going to ignore the hands that are up right now. Would anyone like to make a comment about separating them or not separating them? Mirta, sorry, first. Mirta, you.
I think this is getting a little confusing because you asked Kristen to take it as a friendly. We need to vote on that. I mean, she needs to say yes or no. I don't think we can continue discussion until we say whether that's a friendly amendment to your motion or not.
Okay.
So process-wise, I think we need to dispense with the friendly amendment. Then we move on to the motion that she has in place if she doesn't take it as a friendly. Right?
Well, and then I'm back right where I started. I'd actually like to hear everybody's opinion on whether or not we need to separate them, because I'm not sure at this point.
So you're saying no to the friendly amendment?
I guess I'm saying no right now, yes.
Okay, so we're going to take a vote then on the friendly amendment to separate them. Right?
Actually, well, you have to technically, chiming in from behind the, so you made a friendly amendment. She said no. Now, Amber, it is back to you to decide to make the motion to amend, and then we would vote on it. And then I do believe that would generate public comment because it is a motion.
Okay, I am going to make the motion to amend. And then we will take public comment on that motion. If there's public comment, Claire, if I'm doing this wrong, I'd like to know. And otherwise, we're going to take public comment. Same rules apply on my motion to separate the two items. I don't see any hands up online. Go ahead and come up. Will you time for me, Mike? And we need this to be specifically on the amendment to the motion.
Hello, my name is Ross Best. I did a little bit of research on this in parliamentary procedure and didn't come to a final conclusion. My impression is that as a matter of general parliamentary procedure, it's a good idea for you to separate or divide these questions. Now that, of course, is what I said earlier you should do. It's an entirely straightforward process, and I thought that I remembered that there were provisions in Mason's Manual of Legislative Procedure dealing with this that gave individual, or in Montana statute, that gave individual members the right to demand division of a question. But as I said, I haven't gotten to the bottom of that, but I'd just like to share with you my impression that in keeping with parliamentary history, it's a good thing to do. Thank you.
Thanks, I appreciate that. Any other comments in the room? Okay, I'm going to go to online, and Matt, you should be able to unmute.
That's Larson, Ward 3. Thank you. Yes, I think we should be dividing these questions. I think Mr. Best is right. Just similar as how when there's a question about the claims, people often divide the questions. I think that we can definitely divide these two issues and vote on them separately. Thanks.
Thanks. Okay, so we've had public comment. Are there any council comments on this motion? Mike.
The, I want to divide, I'm fine dividing the question, so I'll support the motion. I'm frustrated that that got put on the floor before we got to talk about it, because I would rather have just dispensed with the motion, because I don't think either one clarifies enough of what we actually need to do. So my intent will be to vote against both of the motions to do that. And I think that we could have gotten there if we had just continued conversation. And I feel that that got interrupted to try and solve a problem before we had a chance to kind of talk about it. So I'm just expressing my frustration, and apologies if I had facial expressions that might have expressed it.
That's okay. We all have our try to keep our poker face sometimes up here, and it doesn't always work. So any other council comments on this motion? Okay, we're going to do a roll call vote.
Okay, everyone. I have worded this motion as a motion to amend so as to separate the two items in question, and saying the two permits that are the subject of the appeal, the garage demolition and the new construction matter, into two separate votes. Is that okay with everyone?
Yep.
All right. Moving on to the roll call vote. Anderson.
Yes.
Becerra.
Yes.
Campbell.
Yes.
Carlino.
Yes.
Farmer.
Yes.
Jordan.
Yes.
Mills.
Yes.
Nugent.
Yes.
Savage.
Yes.
Cheryl.
Yes.
And Vasika.
Yes.
And that passes unanimously with 11 votes in favor.
Great, thank you. Okay, so we are dividing them, and I'm laughing because I thought that was kind of your motion, Bob, but I kind of made it for you. And then anyway, okay, so now we're going to go around the horseshoe. I think we can feel free to take the time to comment on both of those and whatever way you would like. And so I'm going to go to Bob. Do you have more? Oh my God, Mike. Did I say that on the record? Yes, Mike. Oh, good. Okay. You're up here. I see you over here. I see you in line here. Bob, and then I'm going to finish with Bob and then Mike. Please raise your hands online.
Thank you, Madam President. Okay, now that we've arrived at this point, so are we moving through with comments on the garage aspect of this, or
both?
Where we go from
both. You can do either
both
one
at the same time. All right, that's all I have at this point. Thanks.
Mike, go ahead.
Yeah, I appreciate them being separated. I think the garage the garage motion needs to have more specificity to it, which is what I think a lot of people feel. And I don't think well, let's set that aside. So to start, I would move to amend the motion regarding the garage to specify that council feels the Historic Preservation Committee erred in not following the staff recommendation for approving the demolition permit, and erred in their consideration of whether the applicant properly followed the code requiring it to be listed for sale.
Okay, we have an amendment to the motion on the floor. Kristen, I'm making, do you accept that amendment to your motion?
I accept that.
That would make that just made things easier. Okay, did you have more comments to make? So that has been amended, that motion has been amended as you just amended it. Do you have more comments to make?
So we don't have to vote on that one yet.
Not yet, because and we did need to separate the two motions for you to amend that motion. So I think that's good that we did that. And so your motion is the one that will be on the floor and that will be voted on when we take a vote on the garage.
Yep. Rather than trying to amend the second one to fix it, I will intend to vote no on the second one because I think that we need a little bit more discussion. So I'll just leave my comments at that for now.
Okay. I don't have any other hands up online. Daniel?
I guess I would just like to hear from staff on the garage thing one more time. Just maybe in short, like your response to the council saying that that was the error.
I believe that when you look at the letter of our code and the required items that have to be submitted for a demolition permit, I believe the HPC was correct in stating that the applicant did not provide the clarification that is required in the forms of demonstrating that the asking price was comparable to other similar structures in the area. I believe that is pretty clearly spelled out in our demolition submittal requirements, and that was not provided. So I think that on that basis alone, the HPC was right to say that the bona fide effort requirement had not been met.
Thanks. Did you have any other comments? Mirta.
I just want clarification on what we're voting on, because now we have two separate motions. So are we going to vote on the one presented by Kristen, which is the overturn of HBC's decision, and then vote on the amended motion by Mike regarding the permit for the garage?
Kristen accepted Mike's amendment to, since we divided the motion, we have the demolition and we have the construction. We have two motions on the floor. The amended motion was amending the demolition. And Mike, you could restate that if you remember exactly what you said. But so we are going to vote on the demolition that includes Mike's amendment. And then we're going to vote on the new construction.
Okay, great, thanks.
Okay, do we have anyone else that would like to make comments? Mike, I would like to ask that you, since we are going to be voting on something that I think you were considering amending, but I guess are not going to amend, would you like to describe, without making an amendment if you don't want to, how you would like to see it be amended? Because I think that will possibly change how people will vote on this, the original motion on the construction, not on the demolition.
So not the garage part, but the other part.
Correct.
Yeah, I just would like to be able to discuss that in more detail and perhaps add some more clarity to why or why not.
More clarity in the specific motion, because we should be adding clarity right now to why if we are planning on overturning, I think people need to be right now stating why they're going to have it, vote for it to be overturned. That's what we just decided.
I have stated on the record that I'm going to vote no against Ms. Jordan's motion to overturn, and then we will be back on.
Okay. I have some staff with their hand up, and I don't know who it is. Claire, that's you. Okay,
me.
hi Claire. It just says committee staff. Go ahead.
I just wanted to clarify that Kristen's original motion and possibly the two, now that they are separated, included a recommendation to refer them to land use planning to clarify the findings of fact. So if we want to keep that language in there, I think that's appropriate. We can still state on the record the general reasons, but if you want to have more specificity in a written document, that's the current wording of the motions.
I'm having a really hard time understanding what you're saying, Claire.
Just that Kristen's original motion suggested referring these items, was to overturn and refer to LUNP for the findings of fact and to kind of finalize that decision. And then it was Ryan's recommendation to state on the record now why we were overturning things. So I wanted to, I guess it's a question, while we're talking about the wording of motions, whether or not we're still going to be referring them onto another meeting to state the reasons or in further detail. And I guess.
Ryan, did you want to say
So if the motion was to send this, strictly to send this to LUP to have a further discussion in furtherance of overturning it, I think that would be fine. But if you're going to vote to overturn the permits, we need the justification. And we can flesh out the justification and add narrative and supporting material to it, but I think we need to know what to add to it. So I think I would disagree respectfully with Claire's statement. I think we need some justification if you're going to vote to overturn it. If you're going to vote to direct staff to present you with a set of proposed findings, as I've said, because you find generally these problems, we can do that, and then you can vote to overturn at the next meeting based on those findings. I apologize that this is sort of Byzantine, and I understand that that's the case.
Yeah. Okay. So, thank you for both of those clarifications. Stacy, go ahead.
Okay. Hopefully I can help provide some clarity on this. So my understanding is that we now have two motions on the floor. First motion is to overturn Historic Preservation Committee's finding on the new construction, sending it back to LUP to then further flush out the finding. That's a fact. That motion I plan on voting no on, because to the exact point that Mr. Sudbury just made, we don't have enough there to really make a decision one way or the other. So I'm going to vote no to basically move that motion off the floor and kind of start us over again. The second motion, which has been amended by Mr. Nugent, is to say that we are going to overturn the failure or the denial of the demolition permit. And the reasons for our finding of fact is that we believe that the applicant did their due diligence in listing the property for sale, and and that we felt like that was sufficient to meeting some of the criteria for being given the demolition permit. I'm fine with voting yes on that. So then, based on that, we'd probably still go back to LUP unless Kristen wants to amend that portion out of her original statement to flush that final out. And then we go back to the conversation around just whether or not the new construction permit, and we will have dispensed with the garage.
May I amend?
That's my understanding of where we're at right now, and that's how I plan on voting.
Okay, and Kristen I was going to ask you if you wanted to do that. So I'm glad that you preempted me. Kristen, go ahead.
I would like to withdraw my motion related to the actual hospital and keep my motion related to the garage.
Thank you. That's what I was hoping you were going to do. So now the motion on the floor is Kristen's motion on the demolition of the garage with amendments that were accepted. Mr. Nugent's amendments. Mike, you have your hand up.
Thank you. First of all, thank you for withdrawing the second part of that motion so we can properly talk about it separately. I really appreciate it. I don't feel that the garage needs to go back to LUP. I feel like my motion spelled out the reasons why I think that. So, given the convoluted nature that's gotten us here, I don't know, Madam President, what we need to do.
Would you like to accept a friendly amendment saying that it does not go back to LUP, the demolition?
Sure. Yes.
Great. So that's what we need to do. So that motion is on the floor, and I think that we can do a roll call vote. We've taken public comment on Mr. Sudbury, do we need to take public comment on the amended motion?
I think you took public comment on the original motion and the motion to separate them, so I think you've got the gist from the public as to how they feel. So.
Okay, thanks. Always like to have a little check mark from legal. Okay, Claire, if there are no other comments by council, we're going to go ahead and do a roll call vote.
One second, I'm still working on the wording. Okay. With the friendly amendments, the motion currently reads, the motion is to overturn the denial of the permit relating to the garage demolition due to a finding of error for not following the staff recommendation and finding that the applicant made adequate efforts to sell the building. Is that okay with everyone?
Yes.
Let's vote. Becerra.
Yes.
Campbell.
Yes.
Carlino.
No.
Farmer.
Yes.
Jordan.
Yes.
Nelson.
Yes.
Nugent.
Yes.
Savage.
Yes.
Cheryl.
Yes.
Vasika.
Yes.
And Anderson.
Yes.
And that passes with 10 in favor, 1 opposed.
Great, thank you. Daniel, would you like that on committee reports or on the consent?
This is the
final vote. Okay, we're done. Okay, doesn't even matter where you want it then. Okay, so it's been a long day. This is a long meeting to run. Okay, I'm gonna be really squirrely by 5 o'clock. Okay, so Mike has his hand up. Go, Mike.
I move we deny the appeal to the new construction appeal and affirm the HPC's decision.
Okay, so we have a motion to affirm the HPC's position, and we will take public comment on that motion, and then we will go back to council. So if the public would like to, Sandy, I see that your hand's up, but I'm gonna wait until we take public comment unless it's around.
Well, I was going to ask for a brief recess because I'm having a difficult time formulating cohesive thoughts to justify whether I'm going to vote for it or against it while all this is going on. So, and I want to make sense.
Try running the meeting and doing that. Okay, I'm going to let that. I'm going to accept that idea, and we are going to take a 15-minute recess. 15-minute recess seem reasonable. So we're going to come back at 3:20, and we are going to start at 3:20 with public comment on the motion.
better side of the table over there.
No doubt, man. I appreciate the question about finding facts.
Yeah, I figured we should at least sort that out. Yeah.
Well, and then once Mr. Best said that, I was like, yeah, like, no shit.
Yeah,
Like,
right.
it's going to get so convoluted if I'm trying to advance this is one package.
Right.
So I really appreciate what you said. Yeah.
Thanks.
Made a
Yeah.
lot of sense.
Yeah, I've had a hard time with this one, but it's just good to at least get that stated beforehand. Yeah.
Anyway, just wanted to say that.
Thanks.
Or you can send it to create a set of proposed findings. Or you can state them on the record. I guess I think one of those is going to be optional.
Hey, everybody, we can hear what's happening in the room.
Okay, we're back in session. Whew. Okay, we are back, ready to now take public comment on Mr. Nugent's motion to uphold the Historic Preservation Committee's ruling with regard to the new construction. So I will invite public comment on that motion. And Mr. Nugent, if you would time for me, that would be great. Please come up to the microphone and state your name and spell your last name. And I know you've already gone through this, but please do it again so the
Richard Kaler again, K-E-H-L-E-R from Moose Can Gully. I'm overjoyed of the motion has been put forward to support the Preservation Committee. I think if you have a board with the experience that they do and they come up with a certain decision on that, I think it's really not appropriate to overrule that, and I'm not really hearing a lot of evidence to do that. I do continue to have concerns about some of the discussion points on housing and taxes and things that really weren't supposed to be part of that discussion. I look for counsel such as you to defend the ambiance of the fort. The developer probably got the property at a very good price, knowing it's on the edge of a historical district and knowing the limitations in the zoning, and they're looking to make a play to change the rules so they can make more of a profit. And it's only the beginning of opening up the door to future requests. But in regard to the Preservation Committee, I think they did an outstanding job, and I just don't hear any evidence to do anything but to support them. Thank you.
Thanks. Anyone else in chambers?
My name is Scott Keen, K-U-E-H-N. I would like the council to support the motion on the floor. Housing, roads, that's all a different subject. That's not with the HCP. That'll be in zoning and down the road. We need the housing, but that's not what we're talking about now. Again, the private property rights, I am firmly a believer in that, but they bought the property knowing it was in the historic district. They knew the hoops they had to get through. That's what concerns me, is they knew what's going into it. So anyway, that's my comments. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else?
Hi, Ann Rupp Calvis, R-U-P-K-A-L-V-I-S. You know, this sounds a little exciting, like maybe if you uphold the HPC position, maybe we could work together, those of us interested in seeing the health of the area improved by working together to improve the hospital. I see that as a beautiful place to have an office, have a yoga studio, whatever. It's a lovely building. And we've been banging around with Max and his crew for quite some time now. So given the possibility of grants that I'm not aware of, but a lot of people know a lot about that, and working together, I think if we can keep the focus on the hospital building itself, honor the area that it sits in, I think we could make that a lovely place without the additional development. And that sounds kind of exciting. Thank you.
Thanks.
Hello, my name is Ross Best. I don't know what the outcome of this motion will be, but whatever it is, I want to repeat my encouragement that you should deal properly with your findings of fact and conclusions of law. The developer has alleged various errors, and the developer may have grounds for going to court if you have not addressed adequately each of those alleged errors or types of error. And I think it's in everyone's interest, however you vote, to make sure that you are reasonably thorough in explaining and justifying your decision. Thank you.
Thanks. Appreciate your comments. Anyone else in the room? Okay, I'm going to go online. I have an unknown user. That's what you're coming up as. I'm going to allow your microphone. You have 3 minutes to give comment on this motion specifically. Actually,
hi there. My name is Clyde McDuffie, and I live in Rattlesnake. And I just wanted to weigh in on things that have happened today. It seems like you guys have been going at this since, 7 a.m.? A lot of motions, not much progress, it seems like. My personal opinion is that it seems like the majority of the council is bending over backwards to, cater to the developers and, finding a nice way to maybe do one thing but not the other. I mean, let's be real. It's a cash grab, okay? The guy wants, he probably has the best intentions. But, I've seen his development in the lower Rattlesnake, and, I mean, yeah, great. Why does he need to attach all these things to, his development priorities to renovating the hospital? I mean, it seems disingenuous at best. I'd hope that the committee sides with the Historical Society's ruling, and it should not go forward. Okay, that's all. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. Appreciate your comments. And let's see. And then we're going to go to Matt's. Mr. Larson, you should be able to unmute yourself.
Hi, Matt Larson, Ward 3. I kind of agree with some of what the last caller is saying. This has been such a drawn-out process for this development. For a developer who knew what he was getting into, I believe, when he bought something that's on the historical register. We're free in this country to buy whatever piece of property we want to buy, and those properties have deed restrictions and historical registration restrictions, and that's just the way it is. We employ the Historical Preservation Committee to do this job, and we employ staff to make recommendations, and it appears that we've been going back on these recommendations by each one of these entities for fear that this developer is going to sue us or sue the city. Why should we trust this developer to preserve this piece of history if things don't go their way and they're automatically threatening lawsuits or tiptoeing on the edge of that? And then submitting the information 24 hours or less than 24 hours before the meeting, I think is also a disingenuous move from the developers. It's yes, and to hear some people in the council say that any housing is going to solve the housing crisis is not it's not an accurate depiction of reality. If I build a bunch of millionaires a bunch of houses and I don't build anyone else anything else, then I gentrify the area. And that's what the city council has been doing, I think, since around 2016. And I think we need to stop it. And honestly, this is an opportunity to both preserve the fort as it's meant to be and follow the Historical Preservation Committee as their job and their recommendations, follow staff recommendations, and follow the community at large. I'm sorry, this developer bought this piece of property not knowing how contentious this subject is, but it's a large piece of this community's history, and it's not unlike any other community where I could come into that community and buy a piece of property that I know nothing about and try and develop it, and they might not like it. You have to follow the rules, and you have to follow the guidelines that we've set up, and it doesn't seem like this developer has done that. That's my honest opinion. Thank you.
Thank you. And I have David McEwen. I'm going to allow you to unmute your microphone, and you have 3 minutes.
Hi, can you hear me?
We can.
Okay, I'm sorry I can't be there in person. I wish I could. I am president of Save the Fort, and I would like to speak both for Save the Fort, and also I think I could speak for the plethora of people and organizations who comprise the historic Fort Missoula Coalition. I just want to make clear that all of these people involved in Save the Fort and the coalition will work tirelessly using all of their resources and connections to help fix the hospital without the need to add all the other buildings. And I'm asking you to please vote to uphold the historic commission decision. Thank you very much.
Thanks for your comments. And let's see. I don't see the entire, oh, there it is. Okay. Corwin Yellow Kidney. I'm going to allow you, I think that's the name. I'm having a hard time seeing the full name. You should be able to unmute your mic. Corwin, can you unmute your mic? Okay, Corwin, I'm gonna go on to the next person, and I'll come back to you. From my end, it looks like you should be able to unmute, but I'm gonna take that option off for a second and come back to you after the next commenter. Actually, we do not have another commenter. Now it looks like they're leaving the meeting. Is that what you guys are seeing? Okay. Corwin, I'm going to allow your mic again. You should be able to unmute and give public comment. Okay, I don't...
There we go. I'm sorry.
Oh, you're there. Okay.
Hello, I was looking for it wasn't allowing me to unmute myself. Anyways, Corwin Yellow Kidney, YELLOWKITNEY. I would just encourage the city council to follow their HPC's guidelines, and we all make mistakes in paperwork. We do it all the time. But the important thing is following your historic preservation officer that the city hired and the lawyer. Otherwise, you might as well let them go and start making these decisions on your own. So I would say go ahead and keep following their guidelines, and that's all I have to say. Thank you.
Thanks, appreciate your comments. Okay, so, all right, so I think we have taken public comment. I'm going to go back to council for council comments, and I'm going to start with Mr. Nugent.
Thank you, Madam President. I appreciate the opportunity to speak to my motion. I'm going to cover a few topics because I don't think that this was easy. In fact, I think it's very complicated. At the end of the day, I made this motion because I just do not feel that the applicant has proven error on behalf of the HPC. That being said, I do recognize some of the concerns, and I do want to speak to a little bit more of the public comment, because I think that there continues to be huge misunderstanding of what we do, and that turns into, criticizing council for doing things they don't want us to do. And that's fine. We take whatever we want. But, this is a process outlined by state law, and we are acting in a quasi-judicial manner. So we can't just say somebody wants to appeal the decision, but we don't want to hear it. We are obligated to give them a hearing, and I think that is what we've done today. And I'm sorry that it took several hours, but we all had questions. We asked them. We got answers. We gave multiple angles of this the opportunity to speak. And I think that just because someone doesn't like an outcome, it doesn't mean that the process was bad. I also, since this is technically a council meeting, but there's no other comments after this, I will say that, there's been a lot of public comment that has kind of come after council a little bit in like how we are making decisions or how we're doing something before the opportunity to actually hear what we have to say on the matter has come about. The way that our rules work, we follow the Masons guidelines for running a meeting, is if someone makes a motion, it goes immediately to public comment. So you don't actually know how council is going to vote on something. You get to give public comment first. So I would just give the advice for some that your public comment might be more effective if it isn't criticizing council on process that you may or may not understand. It might be more effective if you stick to why you do or don't support a particular motion and what those things are. And I am also going to take a moment to kind of use an example. Somebody who's no longer in the room brought up my children, and in some effort to, I guess, tug at heartstrings. And that person is no longer here. And I think that the implication was he felt like he knew how I was going to vote. But here I am making a motion that probably is opposite of what he thought. And I would offer up that I think that that is cowardly. And I think that I am someone who can handle that. I have thick skin. I obviously put myself through a process that was interesting over the last couple of years. But I think that sort of behavior is why people don't step up and serve the public. I don't think anybody around this horseshoe has any ill intentions. I don't think anybody has an intent to upset the applicant or to upset anybody speaking in favor of the Save the Fort group. And I think sometimes that gets lost in these conversations. And frankly, a lot of our emails over the last several weeks have been this way too. And frankly, there's a lot of emails from people who want us to vote the way my motion suggests, who have kind of said terrible things and made just blanket assumptions about intentions and priorities and the way things work. And I actually think this council's done a very good job of, first of all, not talking about this outside of the premises of these public meetings, but also being open to hearing it. We heard several people say when we went around the horseshoe that they did not know how they're going to vote on this. And frankly, when most votes we take, I have a pretty good idea of how I think everyone's going to vote. I have no idea how this motion is going to turn out. So I would offer that up to say that means that this process worked very well. I do have some concerns about some of the ways that our HPC commission makes decisions and maybe what some of our code is, but as I referenced earlier, I don't know that it's possible to have a completely black and white yes or no checklist for historic preservation, because I think that every kind of opportunity is different. My understanding is that if we vote to uphold the HPC's decision on this, we do not need findings of fact. But I guess I would just offer up what I said earlier, that I broadly feel that the applicant has not proven that an error was made significant enough to backtrack this. And I also put significant weight on the conversation around density and the buildings, and recognizing that while talking about housing is not something that's in our purview, we're discussing the buildings, and they're referred to as residential buildings. And there was a public commenter that brought up that we kind of started talking about housing, but I would offer up that probably 50% of the public comment we've received talked about housing as well, and that the HPC in some of their general comments, as the applicant outlined, talked about housing. So this isn't just something that the council decided to bring up. That was part of the conversation, and for better or worse, it was what it is. So I think that's all I have to say on this motion, but I appreciate the ability to kind of talk a little bit broader on the issue.
Yeah, I appreciate that. You're tempting me to do that as well, but I'm not going to do it yet. Bob, go ahead.
Thank you, Madam President. So my overriding concerns with this is just the degree of subjectivity in the process that's apparent. Some goes to HPC. It just, I think there's been a point well taken about, some of the things that have been proved out there in recent history since 2018 on, and varying degrees of subjectivity or degree by which a structure or what have you is evaluated, and degree of which, they're being laden with conditions on what it is they want to accomplish. I think such is the case here. In conjunction with comments I've already made with regards to the development that's out there, concerns with sight lines, concerns with, what's a prairie, parade fields or whatnot, all that aside, to me it boils down to, what we find most important. And there's been a lot of conversation about residential housing out there, but, it seems to me the focus, if we're talking historic preservation, is the old hospital building. I mean, that's first and foremost, at least in my mind. And I feel it's perplexing to me that, we have an opportunity here to do something to remedy the situation of dilapidation, the eventual dilapidation, I feel, of that structure, if not remediated in the not too distant future. We have the opportunity to do that, but HPC's decided that, we're not going to take this opportunity, and we're going to wait for evidently something else to come at some future point in time. Just smacks to me of the issue we had with the Mercantile downtown, and how long that's been sitting there. It's been sitting there, it's been sitting there, it's been sitting there, nothing's ever done, no one's ever bought it, and, eventually, steps that to be taken to, do something with that block in a way that, adds value and significance to our community. So with all that in mind, I think in regards to overall historic preservation in my mind, I will not be in support of this motion. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Sandy.
Thank you. First of all, I wanted to say thank you to Mike for what he said. I agree with a lot of what he said. And secondly, thank you, Amber, for allowing the brief recess. I usually wing it, but I want to attempt to make sense with my comments. I agree with what my ward mate Kristen said when she originally made the first motion, and while I have a lot to say about the housing crisis, our focus today lies squarely on either upholding or overturning the HPC decision, and we need to state precisely which aspects of their decision that we disagree with. There are 3 findings of facts from staff and or the HPC that I respectfully disagree with, and to save time, I will paraphrase them. The first one says, while the footprints of the two northernmost buildings are relatively consistent with the overall pattern found at the fort, the concentration of large buildings around the post hospital will relegate it to a secondary position on the parcel as the new construction would overwhelm the historic building. 2, the proposed building setbacks clash with existing structures and detract from the city beautiful design. The density of new buildings disrupts the overall pattern, materials, and colors, potentially harming Fort Missoula's historic character. And 3, the integrity of a historic resources setting involves its physical environment and historical context. New construction within the Fort Missoula Historic District should harmonize with existing structures to maintain the district's historic character. Proposed contemporary design elements could adversely impact the overall integrity. So here are my arguments. I respectfully disagree with the notion that the hospital will be relegated to a secondary position on the parcel. The hospital stands as a substantial, imposing structure, which is an enticing presence that will prove challenging to overshadow. And rather than insisting on uniformity, I think that we should consider the harmonious coexistence between tradition and progress. Rather than detracting, it can enrich the fort's character, ensuring that history and innovation walk hand in hand, especially if the proposed design changes are implemented. The juxtaposition of old and new can highlight both eras, emphasizing continuity and change, and offers an opportunity to enrich the area's character while respecting its heritage. By thoughtfully integrating contemporary design elements, embracing density, and using materials creatively, the past and the present can coexist. The overall integrity lies not only in sameness, but also in adaptability, ensuring that the fort's character evolves through layers of history. I believe that these new structures will significantly draw attention to the contrasting eras and emphasize the importance of preserving the original building. And this, in my opinion, aligns with the primary purpose of the Historic Preservation Committee. Therefore, I will vote against the motion to uphold the original HPC decision.
Thanks. And if you two don't have any more questions or comments, you could lower your hand. Does anyone else want to make a comment? Okay. Mirta, do you want to go? I'm going to make a comment, but I was going to let everyone else go first.
Yeah, sorry, I couldn't find my virtual hand. First of all, I just want to thank the developer for being here, providing all the information that you have. It's really, I appreciate it. It's not easy to be you today, and it's not easy to be us making this decision, that's for sure. I want you to know that I started the review of all the materials with everything provided by the applicant, by the appellant, before reviewing anything from our staff, because I didn't want to be, I didn't want that to sway my potential decision. I do think that staff's recommendations were really thoughtful, knowledgeable, and what I keep going back to is that the decision today for us is not whether we think housing should be part of the fort's development or not. What's before us today is whether we agree that the HPC followed the process that they have to make these decisions, and whether that was done properly or not, based on decisions and recommendations from our staff. I'm going to support the motion, not because I don't think that development, mixed-use development, shouldn't happen at the fort. In fact, I welcome it, and I really do hope that through the recommendations and everything that you have heard here today, that you don't give up, that you do bring a project that will meet the historic preservation guidelines, requirements, and the recommendations and everything that you have heard. I do think that through everything that I read, including residential development was not prohibited, was not discouraged. I think that it was a matter of, is it compatible with what's surrounding in the area? And the answer was no. And I think that the people who made that decision know significantly more about it than I do. So I am going to support HPC's recommendation. But I want to be clear that that's not because I don't think housing should be allowed at the fort. I think it's a good place to have a mix of uses. I think that would provide for an equitable enjoyment of the area for everyone in Missoula with different interests and different needs. Thanks.
Thanks, and I don't see any other hands up, so I'm going to make my comments, and then if no one else wants to make comments, we'll go to a vote. I appreciate Mr. Nugent's comments. I do think that the process has worked well. It was a lot of material to review, I think, and I thank council for clearly having put in the time to read all of that material. Many of us had some late nights trying to manage our life and when the documents were required to be in. We're also not a body that is used to kind of reading and sitting in silence. We talk to each other and we process we share ideas, and that's how we get a lot of things done. And this was a read and sit in silence exercise. You know, I'm not basing my opinion on needing more housing, even though I could not agree with that more, or on an additional tax base, or like I said, on the important bird area, which I care about as well. I am not going to be supporting this. I think Bob and Sandy articulated some of the reasons. I don't think that I disagree with the Historic Preservation Committee's saying that it would be a secondary position. I did the tour. I've been out there many times, and I did a lot of driving around out there. And so I obviously have reviewed all the documents that we've looked at. The scale, size, and mass, I think based on what we're looking at, based on where public would be viewing the building from public space, does not diminish its prominence. The open space around it, it would not be a prairie per se. I don't think it is a prairie. Hasn't been a prairie for a while in my understanding of the definition of an actual prairie. But I think there's a circular driveway. There is some preserved area, open space area around it. I think it does still make it look prominent on that parcel. I also, I don't know if this would be a cited reason exactly, because I'm still a little unclear how this works into it, but I think it's a mistake not to have demolition by neglect as part of the criteria of what we look at, because I think that everyone in this room hopefully understands the importance of that hospital to history and to our community, and does not want it falling apart. And it's not looking good. I mean, you don't have to be a builder to understand that that's going to take some real money to fix up, and it's going to, if that doesn't happen, it's just not going to be there at some point. So I disagree with the sight lines. I walked the edges of the property. I think the sight lines generally are still going to be there, maybe not from every possible angle, but I think they're still going to be there. And I think that one of the pieces is that I think the only consideration for sight lines needs to be on public property, because if you're on a piece of private property, I don't think that I don't think we should be able to regulate that. There were some comments earlier around, following the Historic Preservation Committee, and that we have them to do that. And I agree with that, and I appreciate the work that they put in. I say every time we appoint people, I appreciate that they are volunteers, that we are asking to do work for our community. And so, I have some real hesitation going against that. But I also know that this body, we are elected by our community, and that is very different than being appointed by this council. So as an elected, that's where I see a lot of subjectivity. And in my, it becomes subjectivity, and then it becomes my opinion. And in my opinion, I think that they erred in this subjective realm. Does anyone else have any questions or comments? Okay, I don't see. So having that what it is. I appreciate everyone's work on this. I appreciate everyone's time. I do not know how this vote is going to end up, and we are either going to be done early in just a second, or we are going to be here quite a bit longer. So that's where we're at. Claire, we are ready to take a vote.
All right. We are voting, and the wording of the motion is a motion to uphold the Historic Preservation Commission's decision to deny the appellant's new construction permit. Does that work for everyone?
Yep.
Starting with Campbell.
No.
Carlino?
Yes.
Farmer?
Yes.
Jordan?
No.
Nelson?
Yes.
Nugent?
Yes.
Savage?
Yes.
Cheryl?
No.
Masika?
No.
Anderson?
Yes.
And Sarah?
Yes.
That is 7 in favor and 4 opposed.
Okay, so we only need a simple majority for this vote, unless I'm getting late in the day and I'm wrong. That's correct. Ryan is. I'm looking at Ryan. We're always looking at you. Just assume that whenever there's silence, there's someone looking in your direction. So simple majority, which means, and if I think you said that's 7 that were for and 4 that were opposed, so that so we have upheld on that item. We have upheld the historic HPC ruling. I want to thank again the appellants. I want to thank the Historic Conservation Committee. I want to actually thank Save the Fort for coming out, and I appreciate everyone advocating for things they care about and spending your time here. And I don't have much else to say other than appreciate everyone's time, and I appreciate everyone's work and taking this item seriously. And with that, we are adjourned early.